We obey the law. Why must they send soldiers to harm us?
If they can't put this nation in order, let them step aside. Let you take over and put this nation in order. We need a betterment of this nation.
This should be accountable to us. We don't want police brutalizing and innocent citizens of Nigeria anymore.
This is a protest that was born on social media. More than half of the country is under 24. Last night's events were broadcast online, and the Sars hashtag has galvanized support.
I would say that Nigerian government, you guys are a shame to the world for killing your own citizens, sending military to the street to kill unarmed protesters because they are protesting for their rights. It's uncalled for.
Nigeria has been a dictatorship for almost half of its life as an independent nation. Many of its citizens worry Tuesday's events echo the dark days of military rule, and they're determined to make sure that doesn't happen. Miley Jones, BBC News, Lagos.
When I speak to our reporter in Abuja, Ishaq Khalid. Ishaq, a lot has happened in the past almost 24 hours, really. Bring us up to speed with what is the latest before we carry on.
Well, the latest that we have is that Amnesty International has issued a statement saying that at least 12 people were killed allegedly by soldiers yesterday in Lagos, and it says these killings amount to extrajudicial killings and it called for an investigation. What happened yesterday has created a lot of condemnation, anger across the country and even internationally. But the army, it said it did not, it is not responsible for the shootings there. Soldiers were not at the site of the protest, even though eyewitnesses and videos on social media and also Amnesty International say that it has evidence that soldiers were there and they fired.
And we do understand that the governor has spoken not too long ago from now.
Yeah, the governor has again appealed for calm, and he earlier said that there were no deaths and 28 people were injured, however. And he also said that the protesters should be calm, just like the president also appealed for calm across the country in the face of this unrest. And I've been speaking to the Minister of Police Affairs also, Mohammed Nagaridi. He has been telling me that the government will continue to talk with the protesters. The demands of the protesters are being attended to. And I asked him about whether the government is open to an international investigation looking at the kind of condemnation that this response has created. He said, of course, the government is open to an international investigation, and he said the government will welcome whatever kind of watchdog that will come here.
Ishaq, bring us up to speed with the state of the curfews now across Nigeria.
Well, the curfew has been imposed in a number of states, at least 7, not only Lagos, but generally, there is some...
The stand-up continues. The Lagos State Governor, who visited victims of Tuesday's attack in hospital, said more than 24 have been hospitalized.
Fellow Lagosians, whilst we pray for the swift recovery of the injured, we are comforted that we have not recorded any fatality as against the widespread circulation on social media.
But protesters dispute that.
I can't really say who was shooting, but we know who was shooting. Do you get it? And I can't give you the actual number of casualties because I'm not God. I had to run for my life. Other people were running for their lives. They died in the process. They got injured in the process. So I don't know the number of casualties. At the time I escaped from my own life.
Amnesty International agrees, saying there appears to be credible evidence of fatalities, but the pictures have not been independently verified. The United Nations Secretary General, who's spoken with President Buhari in recent days, has called for restraint.
The Secretary General said he's following closely the developments in Nigeria and calls for an end to reported police brutality and abuses. He condemns the violent escalation of the October 20th in Lagos, which resulted in multiple deaths and caused many injuries.
Protests started 2 weeks ago after a policeman shot and killed a man in the south of the country. The Protesters are demanding the scrapping of a rogue police unit accused of murder, extortion, and disappearances. They also want an overhaul of Nigeria's police system, the trial of the officers accused of crimes, and compensation for victims. Some of these demands have been met, but deep distrust remains between protesters and government. Journalists have also been caught up in the sudden turn of events. Here, an independent television station in the city is set on fire. A few hours later, another broadcaster was temporarily forced off air because of what it calls an imminent threat to its staff and operations.
Here in the capital, the streets are calmer than in Lagos. Earlier on Wednesday, security forces dispersed a group of young men gathering on the outskirts of Abuja. Many schools and businesses here remain shut for most of the day after the violence and destruction in Lagos.
There's a general feeling that the anti-police brutality protests may have been infiltrated. It's not clear how much damage this has done or could do to their cause, which many Nigerians still see as legitimate. Ahmed Idris, Aljazeera, Abuja.
Obianuju Iyonea is one of the organisers of the End Sars movement in Nigeria. She says her brother was arrested by the police unit in 2012 and hasn't been seen since. She joins us now from Abuja via Skype. Thank you very much for being with us. I just wanted to ask you in particular just about that suggestion at the end of Ahmed Idris's report there that there might be infiltration into the movement. Is that your impression?
No, I do not think that there is infiltration into the movement. I think the government is sponsoring talks to attack peaceful protesters. But if you say infiltrators, it would be like these people are coming on their own accord, but that's not the truth. We have video evidence of police vans carrying these talks to become violent whilst we are protesting peacefully. So these are state-sponsored talks and touts causing violence, and not infiltration of the movement by violent people. No.
And why do you think, I mean, you've personal experience of losing your brother to police brutality. Why do you think this issue has had such resonance this year?
Because before now, there was no social media attention in Nigeria. Social media attention in Nigeria was really low. And then again, the impunity with which they kill was a little bit limited. Now you find out that everybody is a target. It's no longer about if you are a boy or a girl. It's no longer about if you are Christian or Muslim. It's no longer about if you are fair or dark. They look out for anything, the way you dress, if you dress nicely, if you have good phone, if you have dreadlocks, if you have tattoo. Everybody is feeling it, both the middle class and the poor. The only people who do not feel this are people who have parents in high places. These are the people who do not feel this attack. That is why it has gained a lot of traction, because a lot of people are feeling the average Nigerian is not safe with SARS on the road.
The government has said that they would disband SARS, and that didn't seem to calm the situation, and President Buhari has again called for people to be calm and to have patience while the police reforms gather pace, as he put it. What do you make of that reaction?
This will be the fourth time, if not the fifth, that the Nigerian government will be disbanding SARS. As of last year, the Vice President disbanded SARS on behalf of the President, and still they are in existence. The reason why we didn't leave the streets when they announced that SARS has been dissolved is because we know that it's a lie. Up till today, SARS are still on the road wearing their uniform and attacking civilians, attacking protesters. They are not disbanded. We know that our government lies a lot, and that is why we do not trust them. And when they say that we should give them time before they can start the formation of the police force, it's unfair to demand that from people who are killing unnecessarily. This is simple. Recall these men that are brutal, and then act on what we've asked. Just recall them first. This is something the government can do by issuing an executive order, but they've refused to do this. Instead, they unleash these men on us to keep killing us, even while we are protesting peacefully all through.
Do you expect the protest to continue in spite of the deaths that you've seen?
Yes, I do expect that the protest will continue. We will not calm down. We will not stop protesting because we've been killed. You see, innocent civilians have been killed while they were just chanting the national anthem and raising the Nigerian flag. That is genocide. That's a massacre because we were not armed. There was no reason for them to shoot at us. But the reason why we will not stop is because we do not think that our fellow compatriots who are falling deserves our silence now. So maybe they think that they've silenced us and then we'll keep calm, we'll wait for them, but we'll come out and we'll still demand for the right thing because we are asking for the basics, just simply the right to live, which is a fundamental human right for everybody. We're simply asking to live.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us in Aljazeera. Thank you. Now, protests against police brutality in Nigeria have also been taking place here in London. A large crowd of demonstrators gathered outside the Nigerian High Commission, from where Sonny Gallego has more.
The anger that is being felt in Nigeria since the disbandment of the Sars police force has now travelled all the way to London, where a group of a couple of hundred of protesters gathered outside the Nigerian High Commission, calling for a complete reform of the system. And also some were saying that as part of the Commonwealth, the UK should voice more concern than it has done so already.
Youths are being shot, places are being burnt down, people are very angry with the situation in the country. And the president is not talking. What was he elected for?
We know it's not easy, but show the steps. We know you can't change this thing in a day, in a year. Show the steps that will encourage people that things are being done. Nothing.
We're on here because we want change. Not even end SARS alone. We're here to end everything. So we start all over again. Everything in Nigeria needs a general overhaul.
Now, while the killings at Lekki on Tuesday night seem to be the sparking point for more demonstrations here, it seems that people have had other concerns that have been going on for years, if not decades, about their frustrations with Nigeria. People here have been complaining about not just corruption in terms of politics and governance in the country, but also harassment from the police and how corruption is in effect, according to people here, the way that law enforcement has been functioning really there. So while there is a tremendous amount of anger at the recent violence in Nigeria, this is really amounting to years of anger at the system in Nigeria itself.
Protests have taken place across Sudan as anger rises over dire living conditions and a crackdown on demonstrators earlier this month. The protests came on the anniversary of a 1964 uprising that ended 6 years of military rule. Sudan is currently ruled by a transitional government after mass protests toppled former dictator Omar al-Bashir last year. Hippo Morgan has more from the scene of the protests in Khartoum.
Protesters in Khartoum and various parts of Sudan are commemorating the 21st of October, which marks the anniversary of the first Sudanese revolution in 1964. Now, the black smoke that you see behind me is the result of protesters burning tires to express their frustration at how this government has been operating over the past years. Protesters say that the economic conditions have been getting worse since this government took power in August last year. And they also say that the military is still in control of many institutions, something that they say goes against their revolution, which started in 2018. Now, protesters have been met with tear gas and stun grenades. Most of them have run away from where they are right now to just a little bit to where I was standing right now, and then back again. And they say that's because they do not accept this abuse of force by security forces. Now, many of them also say that they're not here to oust the president, the government of Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, but rather to vent out their frustration and to put pressure on this government to try to improve the economic situation, as well as complete what they say is the demands of the revolution, which is forming a transition legislative assembly and holding to account those who are responsible for killing protesters since 2018.
Still to come on Aljazeera this news hour, thousands of jobs lost as another airline has its wings clipped by the coronavirus pandemic. And not fit for winter, Oxfam raises concerns over conditions at a newly built refugee camp on the Greek island of Lesbos. Francis has endorsed same-sex civil unions for the first time, and the first such statement by a pontiff in the history of the Catholic Church. He made the comments in a documentary that's just premiered at the Rome Film Festival. Francis says homosexual people have a right to be in a family. They are children of God and have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or be made miserable over it. He goes on to say what we have to create is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered. I stood up for that, referring to a similar comment he made when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires. The documentary director says the comments from Pope Francis were less about Catholic doctrine and more about equal rights.
It was a conversation with him. He not was discussing the doctrine. He not tried to change the doctrine. He was talking about that people who basically allowed to have the same freedoms like everybody else, and he not was discussing the doctrine of the church. He not tried to change the doctrine of the church. He was talking that the people not should be discriminated, and the gay community should have the equal rights like everybody else. That's what he was trying to point.
Massimo Fajoli is a professor of historical theology at Villanova University in Pennsylvania. He joins us live via Skype. Thanks very much for being with us. So how significant do you think these words are coming from Pope Francis?
It is significant because now we are in the second phase of Pope Francis' pontificate, and he's trying to solidify previous statements in more formal ways, and it's significant because in these last few months there have been national bishop conferences, for example, in Poland, that have pushed back against a new language on LGBT Catholics. So I think it's relevant even if it's not a formal pronouncement as in the Catechism, for example.
Is the distinction here, though, that civil unions would be okay, but same-sex marriage wouldn't be?
There is, because Pope Francis has never said anything new in terms of same-sex marriage in church. So he has always kept this distinction between civil unions that are important to give LGBT people rights, and marriage, which is a sacrament. And so that is a distinction that Francis has never crossed, has never addressed in new ways.
And in terms of, you mentioned some of the pushback, perhaps also that you mentioned just now in Poland. How will this be received by Catholics across the world, do you think?
I think it will be received in very different ways in different countries. It will be accepted as finally something that has happened finally in most European countries. It will be received in a very difficult way in the United States. It's an open question how it will be received in churches in Africa, Asia, because it all depends from national legislations on same-sex marriages that vary widely. So it's an interesting moment because it's not new, but the moment in this pontificate is new also because of the rise of new nationalist governments that have usually a hard stance against LGBT rights.
You mentioned the point he's at in time for his sort of leadership of the church. How is he getting on in terms of tackling some of the bigger issues or the historical issues that scandals have been associated with the Catholic Church, for instance, the sex abuse stuff?
It's a good question because Pope Francis is much more effective, much better in addressing issues that concern relations of the Church with the world outside. Is less effective or is meeting more resistance with internal reform. This is part of this pontificate, and I don't think it will change. It's really typical of the modern papacy that is much more effective with the outside than with changing the inside.
Professor Massimo Fajoli, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
A mass protest is taking place in the Colombian capital, Bogotá, against the social and economic policies of President Iván Duque. The protests are led by union members, students, teachers, and a large contingent of Colombia's indigenous population, and are part of a national strike action. They're demanding a meeting with Duque to discuss the recent deaths of indigenous activists. About 10,000 of the community have arrived in the capital from southwestern Colombia. Alessandro Rampietti was at the protest in Bogota, one of the first major gatherings since COVID-19 restrictions were eased.
Colombia has had 5 months of quarantine in the country that have greatly affected the economy and have made the livelihood of many people even worse. So they're out here demanding the government to respond to this reality. In particular, unions are asking for at least a temporary benefits such as a minimum wage for people who have lost their work during the pandemic. And they're also here protesting a number of reforms that the government has been proposing and that protesters believe would greatly affect mostly workers and what people here call the proletariat in the country, in the middle class. And so they're out here demanding a meeting with President Ivan Duque. The other reason has to do with the worsening of the security in many parts of the country, especially in very remote rural areas where drug traffickers and criminal gangs are disputing these territories.